Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Wasn't sure if my audio was working. Everything was so quiet for a minute.
It's okay. Yeah.
It's like people generally have much better microphones now in 2023 after 2 years of COVID lockdown and remote work.
Yeah. I've really appreciated lately the greatness of Zoom background noise canceling has gotten insane. So I had a colleague the other day. He tried this and he basically took his guitar out and was just trying to play, and you couldn't hear the guitar. That's how good the noise canceling was.
I don't know if it's just me, but David, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Maybe it's the wrong mic. Oh yeah.
I think it's all right.
Sounds amazing. Hey, Thomas, congrats on the launch. It looks great.
Thanks.
Cool stuff. All right. I think Eloise may be joining in a second, but I'm not sure who else will be joining. So we can probably pull up the agenda. I'll share it real quick. Hey, Ben.
Hey.
All right. I don't know if we have a scribe. Does anyone want to volunteer for that today? Is that a yes or a no?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. All right. And then if you don't mind just adding yourself as a participant on here, we can go ahead and kick it off. If you have any agenda items, feel free to add them. Looks like we have a fairly short list of agenda items to cover. So yeah, if we wrap up early, we get some time back. So yeah, Todd, I guess you're up first. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'll get started. Stop me if my audio or video degrades, because it seems like my internet connection is kind of flaky right now. The speed test ran okay, but I don't know if it'll continue. Okay, so I wanted to give a quick update on client side. So one of the things that came out of last the meeting, the client focused one, was kind of to have a vendor survey. This was Pete's idea. And so you can see it's linked here. Right now it's just a markdown document and in GitHub. I might convert it to something a little bit easier to send out, like maybe a Google survey or something, but it'll basically be that same content. So I'm interested if anybody has opinions on that. But at some point, we're basically going to send that out to vendors, as well as people who we know are somewhat familiar with the project and have their own internal feature flag implementation, just to kind of have them vet our client side stuff and more of a push or query type pattern, instead of just hoping them to, they stumble on the spec PR or some of the OFEPs. So please make comments on that if you think anything else should be included. We're going to send it out. The optimistic goal, my optimistic goal, maybe overly optimistic, is to get that spec PR merged next week, ideally. That's probably overly optimistic, but I think, if we're targeting that, we'll get it merged as soon as possible. So the other thing I'm personally going to do is updates, summarize, and prompt some people who've commented already in the relevant OFEPs, which are linked in the issue. I also have linked in the document in the Google Doc, which summarizes things. I think some of those are fairly non-controversial, and some of them are more controversial. So yeah, hopefully I can get some merged soon, maybe even today, merged and approved, and then the ones that still need to be talked about will stay open, obviously. And then there were some takeaways from the last meeting that are also linked there in the last point. You can go view some of those. Yeah, so I think that's the update on client side. We really want to keep that stuff moving. We want to keep ideally we want to get stuff merged. So if you have thoughts on there, if you haven't reviewed the spec change or the OFEPs, the related OFEPs, or even looked at the issue I'm talking about, please revisit that stuff. But I don't want to belabor that point too much. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the client stuff before I move on to my next point? Cool. So the next thing I want to talk about more in a more general level, I don't think we necessarily need to dive into each of the specific examples, but I'd just like to talk about it and see if anybody has any kind of opinions or takes. Is breaking changes in SDKs that aren't particularly spec related. So we have two examples, one just with an implementation in Java that's a breaking API that's, again, not specified. So we may or may not want to do a V2 for that. I think we have the room based on the spec and the rules with regards to our breaking changes and experimental features, not to do a major version bump there, but we could if we feel like it. And then in Go SDK, we upgraded from 1.7 to, or 1.17 to 1.18. And I kind of, my gut said that should be a breaking change because it required consumers who are on 1.7 to potentially adopt 1.8. But in further discussions, which are linked in the CNCF Slack, it seems like that's not generally the way the Go community approaches it. So those are each specific issues, but I was wondering if anybody had kind of high level thoughts on how to handle some of these things, or if anybody thought we should kind of document some of these decisions, or if we just keep them on a one-off basis within those repos. And if anybody has specific opinions about these two, feel free to weigh in on the discussions.
Yeah, there's a specific issue to comment on, because like from other experiences, I can tell that you get your users very frustrated very, very quickly on breaking changes. I think we should be very obvious and like stating them very early on. So what we ended up doing in other approaches, we announced them way ahead of time, let people comment on it so that they can prepare. I think we learned our fair share there. Like in the beginning, we had some say, okay, we just commented as part of the release notes. That's definitely not how you want to handle it. So ideally, everybody is prepared ahead of time, and and it's not just announcing the strategy, but also the mitigation strategy, whether this is acceptable. Because if it's all of your entire code base, it's highly unappreciated by people. Yeah.
The thing that we've experienced is the difficulty that we've had is just trying to get the bare minimum information in front of people that something's changed. I've been amazed at how frequently people just ignore or don't understand the Semverse system, or are just running on like latest or main or whatever, and then they're like freaking out, like stressing out, shouting at us like you've broken everything, and it's like it's documented here. And I wouldn't recommend running a library on but so thinking about communication more than like, I mean, obviously early is better as well, but like that's the other problem as well. This is one of the biggest problems with running across so many different languages, is some of them have mechanisms for communicating that, common places people go to communicate that or look for that if they're going to upgrade a package. Obviously, for the people that literally go and change a major version in a lock file, then that's they've got the gun and it's aimed at their foot. But it's difficult learning where how because there is no one most effective way of communicating this stuff across languages. That's the critical problem that we found.
Yeah, that seems to be especially the case with the Go one. So that's what we ran into. We decided that we were going to move to Go 1.18 as the minimum Go requirement. And we're like, well, that makes sense to do a version 2. Turns out it's quite tedious, to say the least, to do like major version bumps in Go. And it also, after kind of exploring, like OTel, for example, did not treat that as a major version release. They just documented it as a change in requirements essentially. And so like that, I think that was the big piece here. Like we actually originally were intending to release a version 2. It just doesn't, we have to do a lot of kind of tedious work. And so we want to make sure that we want to commit to basically either having a separate branch for version 2 or like a subfolder or whatever. And that seems very tedious, especially if we're going to bump Go versions every 6 months or a year or something. So that's why we wanted to get people's thoughts there. But that's Go specific, we could treat that very differently in JavaScript, for example. So.
Yeah, I think to Aloise's point, the thing that I'm seeing with the Go issue, and this kind of intersects with what Ben said too. Semver is one thing. Like we're gonna use Semver to our advantage. That's what it's there for. But then there's mechanisms beyond that. So particularly in the Java issue, one of the things I think was a pretty happy medium is that we didn't do a break and change right away, but we added deprecation notifications on the impacted methods. And so those can live now for 6 months and give people a lot of time to absorb the change. So I think strategies like that are useful. And again, to Ben's point, a lot of languages have that, but I don't know how consistent they are, and then how well it integrates with the IDE. So you're actually going to see the warning, and that's the tricky part.
I think the point is, I think we should definitely document it. I think half a year is also fair. Like giving people half a year time to change or upgrade their code, being very specific what needs to be changed, and also like doing an assessment. This is like a minor change that they might need to do, or might they really have to go over their entire code base, which should not be that problematic. And the question is, what does the change actually mean? Can I still build and run against an older version because we didn't change like how a provider works? Like if we only change the SDK, but our provider stay the same, I might stay on an old SDK version. Almost like making a number of, okay, this is what we consider like different levels of impact. This is how we're going to handle them, then work with the SDK providers in the languages. In JavaScript, you will see it this way. In this language, you will see it this way. Just having it a more or less some overall guidance that we communicate to people. I think the key is to have it on multiple channels. I think posting it on the Slack channel from experience is not enough, because a lot of people might not look there. If it pops up during every local build that you're running and you keep ignoring it, I mean, at some point we have to assume grown-up developers there. And will it at some point break their build after half a year? Probably, but not for half a year. But we try to avoid this as much as possible, and also allow them that they can stay on older versions. I think that's also key. To Ben's point, if they run on latest, with the mitigation strategies, don't use latest. It will still work. Like your entire app's going to work, all of your providers are going to work, and you had half a year time. I mean, I think that's fair base.
That's an interesting point as well. So there's going to need to be for every OpenFeature SDK provider, there's going to need to be a range of provider SDK versions that are valid for that provider, right? So that's, yeah, so there's kind of 2 dimensions of versioning complexity here, as opposed to the one that I'm used to, and that's tricky. But I guess you can get, we support versions, 2.x to 3.2.y or whatever, and that's I guess
that's true. You're absolutely right, and it's a challenge. The nice thing is, at least these days, most dependency management frameworks have a way of expressing that. So you can, that's what we've done in our contribs repos, like the ones that OpenFeature maintains, is we've basically put in, the npm, the package JSON in npm or the POM file in Maven. We've used, we kind of consider them the SDK peer dependencies and say, okay, you have to have an SDK in this range, this minimum version for this to work. But you're right, like that 2-dimensionality is a challenge for sure.
And then the other thing that we've experienced with Flagsmith, so one of the mistakes we made was we had a huge change to our SaaS platform. We did major version semantic updates to all of our SDKs. Again, a lot of people, not a lot, some percentage of people just ignored that and were like, I'm going to go from 2.3.5 to 4.0 to 0 and not read anything about that at all, which is fine. People do that. But the problem, the mistake that we made is, I think we should have just failed out at that point when we saw that it was pointing to an old domain name or an old configuration, and just failed as hard as possible, because you're going to, you know, rather than have it, what happened was it did fail, but it could have failed in a more noisy way. And that, you know, because by the nature of the sorts of thing it is, people are going to be going, right, I'll now do npm install and npm run and see what happens. And if it doesn't start spewing out massive lists of errors, but just sort of, we weren't silently failing, but we weren't failing as loudly as we could. And again, there's paradigms around that. I mean, I don't remember, I think Rust and Java are the only two languages I've ever really seen deprecation warnings in, right? I can't remember any others. Like, it's not a common thing to do in other languages, but yeah. But so yeah, if there's a way of, like, it would be ready, it might be easy to say, like, you're running OpenFeature JS version 2.1, but you're pointing at Launch Darkly 3, and that just won't work, right? And then just you know, do a whatever as hard an exit as you can kind of thing, because this is just, there's no reason why you'd ever want to run in that broken state. And like, read the manual.
Yeah, I guess there is two things here. Like, you have to communicate to the user of OpenFeature, but also to the providers, the people who are building providers. And this part, I don't know how you want to handle it, because probably providers don't check that their provider is running correctly with the latest version of OpenFeature every day. So we may have like a different system to notify people that build providers. And like the one for SDKs, as you said, Ben, like, it can be in a runtime thing, like super strong warning and say, hey, it's not compatible. But notifying providers, builders, maybe it's a different way of doing it. I don't know exactly how, but we may think another way. Maybe having a mailing list or something, I don't know, like even something where people can just put their name in and say, I want to be notified about any breaking changes. Or
Yeah, like a security mailing list. I think that's a good idea. I think also for providers, and that's like even the recommendation, the contributing MDs. If you're building on top of OpenFeature or building a provider, we recommend you to subscribe to those mailing lists and be dedicated, especially to these topics like spec changes, breaking changes, or adaptations.
Yeah, I mean, the one part of it is we should encourage people to add their provider to our docs. And if it's in our docs and we do introduce a breaking change, we could use that as a way to, it's kind of painful, but hopefully we're not doing that very often. Like, we need to do everything we can to not break that contract. We can extend it, of course, and that might also fall into this piece too, where we need to let people know, like, new functionality. If you want to take advantage of it, update your provider. But yeah, that could be one way, at least, to have a sense of who needs to be contacted to upgrade. Plus, if they're in the contribs, we can handle that easy. So those are two options potentially. Okay, anything else on that one? I think we have a couple of ideas there at least, and I think at least for the Go one, it sounds like people are okay with, if as long as we communicate it properly, staying on version 1 would probably be sufficient.
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, if you want to weigh in on the Slack conversation, Anthony Mirabella from Hotel weighed in, and that was particularly helpful because obviously he has a lot of experience with this kind of thing. So I think as a takeaway for me, I'm going to look into creating a doc that captures some of the stuff we're talking about, and put it somewhere, like maybe in like we already have the .github that has some security related maintenance stuff. So maybe, yeah, I'll look into where a good place to summarize a lot of this stuff is, because it will impact both SDKs and providers, as we kind of discussed. we can have some high level guidelines around it.
That makes
And
sense.
for the, sorry, for the mailing list we mentioned before, we could actually, on the CNCF list, you can create these. So that way they're easy to find and easy to subscribe to, and we don't really have to maintain them. So I can reach out and just ask them to set one up. It could even just be we don't even have to create a new one. It could even just be the OpenFeature project mailing list that exists.
Yeah, I think that the timing aspect is critical, like I mentioned, half a year, and it's just over communicated, like put it in every newsletter, every release announcement that we're making, or release notes all the time, that because you can't assume that people ignore or don't find the time to engage with a lot of information that you might be putting out there.
Yep, makes sense. All right. Yeah, just a reminder, if anyone else has anything, please feel free to add it. I'll put it in the link. Just a couple like really quick updates from me. KubeCon EU is coming up relatively soon. And we did apply for a booth and for at least a 1 hour like in-person time slot. As far as I know, we have not got confirmation that we have it, but I'm pretty confident we'll get it again. Worst case, we take the captain booth and we share it. So I'm sure we can figure out a way to have a presence there. We're also, Todd and I had submitted a session on basically GitOps and feature flagging. If that's accepted, we were going to basically do a version of that, or apply for a version of that at ArgoCon, which is the day before essentially KubeCon starts. And so if anyone is planning to attend, maybe consider also going to ArgoCon if you have any interest in some of these, like, kind of GitOps flows in the cloud native world. So hopefully Todd and I are there as well. We'll certainly be at KubeCon. So if you're going to be there, let me know if you're interested in helping out at like the booth, or just, swinging by and saying hi. We'll be there basically all week. So it should be a good time. And then one of the things that we should think about, this might be something for like the governance committee as well, and future sessions, but figuring out like if there's any kind of like press release or announcements we would like to make. I think one good goal should be client side, or browser essentially support, because that's a big one. It's been a topic that we've talked about for quite a while, and I think that's reasonable given the timeframes that we've talked about earlier. So I guess we can continue to work towards that. If it becomes clear that we can't make it, then we obviously won't. But I think that would be a good goal for KubeCon. All right. Any thoughts, feedback, questions on any of that? All right, moving on. Just this is a quick like heads up. Oh, cool. We'll see you there, James.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, geez, we're gonna have the whole gang there. Ben, are you coming?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to. It's a day after my birthday. But yeah, but maybe that's a
Perfect.
good reason to go.
That's perfect. Eloise will take you out for your birthday beer. All right. Next one. This is just kind of an FYI. We did actually, based on Ben's recommendation, sign up for a tool called Orbit, which is basically like a community kind of tracking tool. And then David went ahead and applied for the open source license for that. So we do have access to that. We have a limited seats with it, that commercial thing. So if you like need access, want access, or interested in the reports, let me know. I'm sure we can figure out a way to get it to you. But it is kind of interesting because it shows you basically like who's started what project at what time, first time contributions, things like that. So yeah, if it's something that of interest to you, let me know. And it's also, something that we'll continue to kind of track to see like what, provides like essentially the most engagement. If it's certain blog posts or tweets or whatever, we can continue to do that. So that's basically it for me. Yeah, if you have any questions on that, let me know. I think it's a pretty interesting and pretty cool tool. So yeah, I think that should help a little bit at least track some of this. Cool. David, it looks like you're up next.
Yeah, just one last thing on Orbit. So when I reached out for the license, they also offered to have kind of like a learning session. So again, if anyone's interested there, let me know and maybe we can try to set this up. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and just bring back the interesting findings. Yeah, other than that, the first edition of the newsletter will hopefully come out in the next few days, I hope. Yeah, and if you have any blog posts or videos related to feature flags in general that you think could be useful for first-time users or could be useful in general, feel free to add in the links here, or I'll also create an issue on GitHub. Yeah, I'll also put in a call for adopters. So we created a new issue template. So if someone is using OpenFeature, they can create, again, an issue and they will get added to the adopters page. And I'll also try to link in the newsletter some good first issues for people to get started with, as well as like all the contact information. But if you have any suggestions, anything you think would be a good idea, feel free to yeah, put in your suggestions.
All right, cool. Looks like that's basically it for agenda items. If anyone has anything else, please feel free to add it. If not, I guess we
Nothing
can
new
wrap.
on incubation for the time being. Unfortunately, I think we're making good progress. I think the biggest topic is really future plans. I mean, we have obviously something there, but that's what we need to work a bit more on, and then waiting to get sponsors and seeing the thing obviously move forward.
Mhm.
These things
Okay.
usually take a while, so just getting close to KubeCon Europe. That's why. If you know people in the TUC, usually you're not allowed to like ask them proactively. But if you know people better that you can ask them proactively, it would be worth actually doing so.
Yep. Sounds good. Let's see. Yeah, so we'll continue to work through that if anyone has any interest. There is, I think, a fork of our proposal in the org, so you can take a look at that. You know, feel free to add pull requests if there's any section that you are passionate about adding content to. Otherwise, we'll continue to kind of chip away with it and hopefully get some sponsors at the CNCF level soon. Perfect. Anything else? Cool. All right. Well, I guess we can wrap up then. Appreciate everyone's time, and yeah, we'll talk soon.